Good evening to you both. And let's begin with what our Premier had to say coming out of Monday's First Minister's meeting in Saskatoon, the first since the federal election.
I'm encouraged that the Prime Minister is prepared to do a two-track process. Let's identify a project and a window and work towards identifying the ways, some of the barriers that have been in the way of the current regulatory process.
Danielle Smith went into the meeting with a plan to talk pipelines, one of a list of provincial and territorial leaders' projects that they want approved to strengthen the economy in the face of Trump tariffs. The Carney government now preparing legislation to fast-track projects deemed to be of national interest. Marg, I'll start with you. Surprised there was an air of unity coming out of Monday's meeting, despite there not being any specific projects identified as something to fast-track or to pour funds into.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. It looks like they got some agreement in process, which is, I think, what the Prime Minister was looking for. And pleased to see the unanimity that amongst the First Ministers, the Premiers, and very pleased with our Premier's response to the whole thing.
Chaldeans, maybe on a scale ranging from performative to productive, what do you feel Monday's meeting has accomplished in this express goal of creating one Canadian economy?
Well, Michael, it was performative in the sense that they haven't had an opportunity to meet like this for a very long time. The Trudeau government was very hostile to executive federalism, meeting the first ministers. So this is a good start. And even though we had all kinds of self-congratulatory messages, I think they began a process of having a Canada-focused approach where we do an overhaul of the regulatory system and we begin to move towards a reduction of all the barriers with internal trade. But Michael, when I listened carefully, I could see some cracks there. People haven't reported on this, but I think the cracks are that it was a big mistake not to invite First Nations to the table. I know it's a First Nations meeting, but it would have been very positive to invite the leader of the AFN to the table. I think that would have been very, very positive in my view.
Marg, you touched a bit on your impressions of what Danielle Smith had to contribute. What do you feel, though, should be taken from her tone coming out of the meeting? How much of a win is there here for Alberta?
Well, her tone seemed very positive, and it sounds like she was heard, which I think was one of her points. The necessity for looking at pipelines in probably all directions, for not just Alberta, for the Canadian economy. And so it seemed like a very positive start. And I liked her comment about them discussing a two-track process, because I always felt that the process could be streamlined a bit, not have the federal process, then the Alberta process, then, other ones layered on top. So I'm assuming that's what they talked about. And I think that's a very positive start, both for Alberta and for Canada.
Chaldeans, how far do you see the outcome of this meeting going toward tamping down the separatist rhetoric bouncing around the province?
Michael, I think this separatism threat it can be really undermined if there's progress in helping Alberta get its products to market. And I think this process that has started, we're seeing a bit of enthusiasm from the Prime Minister to develop natural resources, working with the provincial government. And I think that two-track process, first of all, we have the project identification process, and now we're going to have a short list coming out of the federal government. And I think if people in Alberta see that the federal government is serious about helping Alberta send its products to market, I think that will really undermine any kind of case for separatism. So this is a good start, I think. Good tone, but I think there has to be more action to make sure that that separatism threat is really addressed.
And Marg, on that point, what do you see hanging in the balance now in terms of pressure on Mark Carney and his cabinet to make good, be that legislation on internal trade barriers or actually greenlighting nation-building projects like pipelines for Alberta?
Well, I think he's put a lot of pressure on himself and the government to, he's given himself some pretty short timelines. I think it was a program or two ago, I was a bit skeptical that things could be done by July 1st. I'm a little less skeptical now. It seems like he's ready to move ahead, but he certainly has set himself some tight deadlines. So a lot of pressure, but so far he seems to be able to withstand the pressure of moving forward quickly.
Well, time, as always, will tell. Now, hot on the heels of the First Minister's meeting for the Premier is a trip now to D.C. Danielle Smith is leading a delegation of Cabinet and caucus members in Washington through the remainder of the week to represent Alberta in talking energy development. Chaldeans, how does this play in the wake of such a high-profile meeting in Saskatoon? Is it as simple as turning the page and powering forward with efforts to expand Alberta's energy relationship with the U.S.?
Michael, I think I see this as complementary to the process happening in Canada, where Canadians are laying down the foundation for an independent, more focused trade posture away from the United States. But the reality is that we are very dependent on the American market. So I think the Premier going to Washington, D.C., talking to decision makers on the need to incorporate Canada in a North American energy security scenario, I think it's a very positive development. And it's interesting, I think, that this group that has invited the Premier really focus on highlighting the Premier. I went to the website, and the Premier's face is the first photo you're going to see from the list of speakers. So I think that is a good promotion for Alberta, and it's going to highlight the importance of connecting with U.S. decision makers. And I think that will complement our internal processes here in Canada to make our economy more resilient as we face this Trump challenge.
Marg, as a former energy minister yourself, what do you see this level of continued political advocacy achieving? How necessary is it for a government delegation led by the Premier to spend a week in Washington?
I think it's still pretty important. Those meetings are very useful for meeting with, bureaucrats, people like Nathan Cooper, who, the equivalent, he's going to be our representative there, but they're representatives to us. There's a lot of good work gets done in those meetings. And because the U.S. is still our most important, we supply a lot to them, an important customer, those relationships need to be maintained. And, President Trump isn't going to be there forever, and who knows what the tariffs will bring, but those customers are still going to be there. So it's pretty important to maintain those relationships and keep Alberta in the forefront for the U.S.
The Smith government has extended the deadline for a third-party investigation into allegations of conflict of interest and arm twisting in healthcare contracts. Former Manitoba Chief Judge Raymond Wyant was expected to submit an interim report last week, followed by a full report next month. However, the government employee facilitating the investigation says the number of documents provided and interviews requested by Wyant means the initial time frame is no longer feasible. The interim report has now been pushed to September, with the final report due in October. Marg, this came out in a news release Friday afternoon. Surprised to see this extension being announced the day the interim report was to be submitted. Could or should the decision have been made sooner?
I'm guessing the decision should have been made sooner, but perhaps the judge in this case did ask for extra information that had to be given. I'm always suspect when things are put out on a Friday afternoon news release. That's just me. But I was surprised that they extended it, but maybe it's for good reason. I really don't know.
Chaldeans, how much does this call into question the initial timeline given for such a third-party investigation?
Yeah, Michael, I think the timelines the government gave to the judge was pretty tight. I mean, we're expecting the judge to look at a whole range of processes dealing with, first of all, the chartered surgical facilities, pharmaceuticals, and he's going to be reviewing legislation, policies of the government, and we'll have to really tap into all kinds of documents. So it was a pretty tight timeline, and I think this extension will give him more time because there's a lot of work involved here to get to the bottom of exactly what is happening with this procurement issue. And on the parallel track, Michael, we have the Auditor General investigating some of the processes involved in procurement, and then, of course, the RCMP. So this is a comprehensive review, and hopefully we'll get to the bottom of this at the end of these processes.
Marg, to Chaldean's point, there's a lot going on here. So do you see the extension changing the scope of the investigation or even the expectations of Albertans on the outcome?
Well, that's what I wondered when I heard it at first, that maybe the scope is expanded. And I'm certainly in favor of doing a thorough job and getting it right. At the end of the day, I think Albertans are just going to want to know what went on, who's at fault, what's going to be done to prevent this in the future. But I suspect the scope has expanded, and that's why there's been an extension.
Chaldeans, had the interim report been released as expected last week, how much of an impact might that have had on the 3 by-elections now to be decided June 23rd?
Well, Michael, certainly the NDP is very focused on this issue. For the NDP, this is an opening. They see this as a scandal of high proportion. They even refer to, if you look at the messaging, they say what corrupt care. So they've already made their mind up, and if the report had come out and highlighted any kind of issues or deficiencies that could be targeted to the government, I think that would really have given the NDP a boost. So yeah, the timing in relation to the by-elections, I think, is very interesting, and this postponement perhaps will give the UCP a bit of breathing room as they await the outcome of these investigations.
Marg, where do you think this leaves calls for taking investigations to the next level, namely demands from the opposition and others for an independent public inquiry?
Well, depending what they report, I don't think it's going to stop those calls. I think many Albertans would want an independent report. Yeah, this is a bit. Could be a bit dodgy depending on how it's done. I have some faith in the judge who's been appointed to keep it as independent as possible. But it really depends on what he reports and whether that satisfies Albertans or not.
Chaldeans, public inquiry or not, Judge Wyant's investigation is one of many, to your point earlier. How likely is the extended deadline for reports to have any kind of impact on those other probes done by the Auditor General, the Mounties?
Well, Michael, I'm particularly focused on the Auditor General's work. I mean, we shouldn't dismiss his efforts. I think it's crucial to remember that the former Auditor General released a report on Alison Redford's use of government airplanes, you recall that. And that report by the Auditor General was expansive and had political consequences. So I'm really looking forward to what he produces from this situation. I think that the public inquiry could come into play later, but I think we should be careful not to make any hasty conclusions and leave these processes play out and see what happens with these outcomes that are delivered by the 3 levels of investigations.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. We're out of time. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Michael.
you, Michael.